services. In this nugget, we discuss services, and services are kind of like little applications that run in the background that are just waiting for something to do. And when we take a look at the services, they're not really going to do much for us unless they're already started, or unless they can be started. Because a service can be disabled, so it can't be started at all until you change it to manual, at which point you can manually start it up, or you can set it up on automatic so that it just starts up when the system starts up. So we'll take a look at some of those properties as well as dependencies. I mean, there are several services that are interdependent upon other services. So if one of those other services is not running, then this service will not run either. And you have to be able to understand that because there may be services that will have a domino effect and kill other services. We'll also take a look at user accounts. There's some pretty important things there. I mean, what if you have a service that starts under the identity of a user account, and there's a problem with that user account, especially in regard to things like passwords, which we'll see. So you got to make sure that user accounts will work well with the services. And then we'll take a look at scheduled tasks as well, which are not really services in and of themselves, but they can be similar to a service in that they can perform a function for you without anybody actually being there. And we'll take a look at, again, how user accounts have an impact there also. When my wife and I first got married, we took a honeymoon in Cancun, Mexico, which was quite an exotic trip for us back in those days because we didn't have two pennies to rub together, as my parents would have said. So anyway, it was a wonderful trip, despite the fact that it rained most of the time. But one of the things we were able to do was we went to a French restaurant. Yes, a French restaurant down in Cancun, Mexico. It seemed like it was a little displaced, but it was a very nice restaurant. One of the things that we really enjoyed about it was that down there we had a level of service that we haven't really seen in many other places at all, unless you spend an arm and a leg. And we had a server, and I guess he was kind of a co-server or a busboy or somebody, just almost hovering over our table. And anytime our water glass got even just halfway empty, someone would come and fill it. Or if we would just glance at the waiter, he'd come running over and ask us if there was anything he could do, which was kind of strange having someone serve you French food with a Spanish accent. Anyway, we really enjoyed that because they were at our disposal, really. And, it was kind of fun because you have a service that is ready to serve you at any time. And that's exactly what Windows has as well. And if you go to Start, Administrative Tools, and then down to Services, you'll see that there are a lot of servers or services, if you will. These are just like hovering waiters that are just waiting to do something with the system. Now, some of these services are already actively running and so forth, and I'll tell you what else I'm going to do here. I'm going to go to a standard view. If you look at the extended view, which we're in right now, if you click on something, it gives you some kind of a description about it over on the left. In our case, it's just for space and so we can see more. I'm going to go ahead and go to the standard view, and we'll explain any services that are necessary. For example, let's just start right up here at the top. We have the alerter service. Let's just use that as an example of a service that we can take a look at. Now, services are like those servers down in Mexico. They're often just hovering, waiting for something to do, although you can see that this server, apparently it's their day off because this one's totally disabled. This one means that it cannot be started at all until I double-click on it and then go over to, down here, and go to the disabled item right here and choose either manual or automatic. Now, if I choose manual and then click apply, that then gives me the opportunity to click on start. Or if I could choose automatic, then the next time the system starts up, it'll automatically start the service. And I'm just going to go back to our default setting for the time being. So anyway, this is a service, and when we look at a service, so there are several key things you need to keep in mind with it. Number one, you need to see if there's a logon account associated with it. Now, most accounts are going to be using the local service system account that you see here. And that's going to be a service account that doesn't require anybody to actually physically log on to this system. And that's the way you want it to be because most of the time for servers, nobody's logged on to them anyway. On the other hand, if you have some kind of an application that perhaps has added a service, and you will have some apps that will add a service to this services list, then they might need a local system account and need to maybe allow them to interact with the desktop. Now, with this kind of a service, what's going to happen is it's going to provide a user interface so that if somebody is logged on, there will be some kind of a dialog box or a message pop up or something that allows a user to interact with it. But we don't use these quite as often as these kinds of accounts would be used. And then if this service is supposed to be running and then it crashes, we'll see what happens in recovery. We can say after the first failure, take no action, or we can say restart the service. And then after the second one, we can say again, maybe run a program, maybe run a net send batch command that will send a message out to an administrator account somewhere so we can be notified of a problem. And then maybe any subsequent failures, we'll just take no action. And that might be advisable because we might not want this to continually try to use processor cycles restarting if it's not able to start after the second time, because, hey, if it can't start twice, there's probably something going on else that needs to be checked out here. And then you can see that you can reset the fail count after X number of days and restart the service after so many minutes, if possible. And then down here's the program thing. We were talking about running a program up here. You can point the program down here in this command line wherever the batch file or the script or whatever it is that you want it to run. And then as we go to the Dependencies tab, you'll see that there are certain things that depend upon this service or that this service depends upon. And it just says it right here. This service depends upon the following system components. The workstation service. This is a common service that runs as kind of a common thread through many of the services that we have on a Windows Server 2003 server. And by the way, much of what I'm showing you here is really going to apply to any current Windows NT-based operating system. Well, let's find another service that's kind of interesting that might have some more dependencies on it so that we can look at something new here. Let's go and look at, actually I think telephony has quite a few, so let's go look at telephony. Now if I double click on this one and go to this Dependencies tab, we'll see that this service, telephony service, depends upon some system components, like there's plug and play right there. So if I need to use telephony to dial out to another host, for example, or to a remote access server, well, how am I going to do that unless plug and play has detected the modem? So you can see how it's dependent upon it. Also, once I've made that connection and I can successfully dial out, I need to be able to access resources on the destination network, and we do that in Windows networking typically through remote procedure calls. Well, if I don't have remote procedure calls available, then my telephony service is not going to work very well because I'm not going to be able to access anything. We also have remote access auto connection manager. Let me show you how that could have a place in this. If I go into Internet Explorer, for example, and let me just go to Tools and Internet Options, notice that this Connections item would allow me to potentially select a dial-up connection. I don't have any dial-up connections anymore on this server, but if I did, it would show the various dial-up connections that were available, whether VPN or dial-up, and I could choose to automatically dial one of those out anytime I double-clicked on Internet Explorer. Well, that's where this Remote Access Auto Connection Manager piece takes place. We can also use the Remote Access Connection Manager. This is not automatic, but in that case, we could still manually choose to dial out when we access the Internet. And you see here also that this system components will also depend upon the telephony service, and that would be the ICF and or the ICS service. This is where we're going to get kind of a home office, small office firewall, and we got people behind this firewall trying to access the Internet. Well, without the telephony service, they're not going to be able to access that. So what that's saying then is if this telephony service were to go down and were to stop suddenly, then my firewall and or my Internet connection sharing would also fail. So you can see how that one of these services can kind of be the start of a row of dominoes going down. One of them falls down, a whole bunch of other ones are also going to fall down. Now let's go ahead and take a look at one of these services in play. And a real easy one to work with would be the messenger service. So let's go to a command prompt. And if I wanted to do a net send command, for example, net send, and I'll send a message to this local computer where I actually am, DC Nugget 2, and I'll say hello. And I should get a pop-up dialog box here in the middle, but we're not seeing that. It says it couldn't be found on the network, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that doesn't sound like any fun. Why isn't it sending me anything? That's because the messenger service has not started. Now, this has nothing to do with Windows Messenger, that little chat thing that we waste time with. This has more to do with things like what I was just doing with that messenger service, where I was trying to send a message. So with this, I would go to Manual, and I would click Apply here. Or I'd click OK, and then I just have to reopen this thing again. And then I'll click on Start. And then if I wanted to access this all the time, and I was pretty sure I wanted to access it a lot more, then I might just set it to start up automatically. Now, the reason why this service is not started automatically, and why a lot of the services that you might have been used to in the past are not started automatically in Windows Server 2003, is it's just an additional security measure. You never start a service unless you know you need it. Why? Well, I don't know of any exploits against some of the services. However, it's only a matter of time before someone exploits them. I'll give you an example here also with the Messenger and the Alerter service. There are a lot of NetBIOS messages out there on the Internet, and there's a lot of spam that takes place with NetBIOS connections. I'll tell you, if you want to prove that to yourself, go home and just go to your broadband connection and turn off the firewall filtering for any NetBIOS ports, like port 137. And then you'll see how many messages you get. In fact, the person in the office next to me is a realtor, and they just had a broadband connection put in, and I went over. They were asking me to come over there and help them, and I went over to look. They had hundreds of NetBIOS messages on the system, advertising everything from little blue pills to all kinds of other enhancements that you could get and all that kind of stuff. So it's just kind of another way of getting spam, as if we didn't have enough already. So anyway, we got this set to manual now, and then I'm going to go ahead and apply this, and then we'll go ahead and start it. Oh, I was blathering on. I forgot that I already did start it. Anyway, so we'll go ahead and start that now. Then we'll go ahead and click on the command prompt here, and we're going to go ahead and do a net send again. And this time, and there it is, sure enough, we get the message now because the messenger service has been started. Let me also give you a quick shortcut. If you do need to stop or start any of these services, just simply right-click, and you can see from the menu here all the different options that are available to you. And now, let me go ahead and point out a couple of other critical services that you might not be aware of their usefulness. First of all, there's the print spooler service. You can, again, use the GUI here if you like, but I get accustomed to using the command line, so I just go to a command prompt here, and I'll just do a net stop spooler. And that will stop the print spooler service. And then I can do a net start spooler and then restart it. Why would I do that, by the way? Well, 9 times out of 10, if I have trouble with a printer and it's not a physical problem with that printer or not a connectivity problem like a cable's loose or something like that, if I will just stop and start the spooler service, it often will cause my print jobs to go back through again and be okay. And anybody who's administered for a while knows that that's a common command that you'll use. Let me also take a look at a couple of other ones. Net stop DHCP. Let's just do a pop quiz here. What will that do? The common thinking there is, well, if this is a DHCP server, it's going to stop the DHCP server service, right? No, it stops the DHCP client. And if I press enter here, you'll see that. It stops the DHCP client service. So I guess I better start that up again if I'm going to use a DHCP client address. If you are running a DHCP server, then what you'll want to do is a different command. Because you see, this will just prevent us from getting an IP address now. What we'll want to do instead was do net start DHCP server, or net stop, respectively, of DHCP server. And there's actually a space there, so that's how it would look if you wanted to start that service. Unfortunately, from the command line, there's no restart. It's just either net stop and then net start. Now let me go ahead and show you a couple of other services that you might not be aware of that they are or are not started. And that would be, one of them would be this one, the Windows Audio Service. This is disabled by default. If you have audible sounds that you want to hear from the system, from the server, for example, whenever an alert comes up or something like that, if you have an application that plays some kind of a WAV file whenever there's an alert that pops up or something like that, well, you'll need to enable the Windows Audio Service. How about another one? How about if you had CD-ROMs on this server that you wanted to burn? You want to just do a quick one-off copy for a quick backup of a certain portion of your volume or something like that. You want to just put that on a burnable CD real quick. Well, if you got a CD burner on this server, you're never going to be able to use that service. Why? Because this service is not started by default, and we need to look for the IMAPI, and it's up here somewhere. There it is, IMAPI CD burning service. And once you get this thing started, then you'll be able to drag files to the CD-ROM and go ahead and use the burning capability built into Windows Server 2003. Now then, here are some key things to remember, especially about the user account that you use for these, especially, again, if you have a custom application that has installed the service and need to configure a user account to run that service. That's often the case that will happen with certain backup software that you want to run in the middle of the night when no one's actually physically logged onto the machine. Well, once you install a backup software, the software will prompt you to create a user account that will be used to start that service. What you've got to be careful of, however, is that when it starts that service, then you go into the properties of that user account. Let's just go to Active Directory Users and Computers. Then here I'll go to this Services OU that I created. And if I've got a user account that I'm going to go ahead and create here, I'm just going to quickly create a user account here. Then it's real easy to just kind of next, finish through this thing, give it a password, and then just kind of go next, and then go ahead and click on finish. But you're going to have a problem with this. Why? Let me go back for a second. When the first time that this service tries to start up, it's going to get a prompt for a password change, and it will not be able to actually run. Actually, it won't even see the GUI for the password prompt change, but it won't be able to log on either because it's going to have to change its password. So we're going to have very limited success trying to run this backup. Also, the user cannot change the password. That's what you should do, so I should clear that. And then I should check this. Why? Because if somebody ever does exploit that account, well, there's a lot of different things that they could do, but one of the things they might do is to just be malicious and change the password and kind of to vandalize the account. So then they'll change the password, and that way, if this service account is set to start up with a scheduled task, well, the passwords won't match anymore, and it just won't run anymore. So that's just kind of a vandalizing of that account. So we'll make sure that the user cannot change the password anymore. You must also make sure that you say password never expires. Why? Because most domains have a password expiration policy, maybe of like 42 days by default. Well, you don't want this service to stop running after 42 days, so you got to make sure that that password never expires. Otherwise, after a few weeks of running, this service suddenly stops running for some reason. Now, I also mentioned, by the way, that you can coordinate this in conjunction with things like scheduled tasks. So that, for example, if I wanted to manually configure the scheduled task for this backup service account, then I might go to Start, then I go to my, where are my all programs here, and then I go up to Accessories, and then finally I'd go up here to the System Tools to find Scheduled Task right here. And then I might just configure this, and we won't go through every step with this because there's several things involved there, and that's not the main point. The main point is you can add a scheduled task, and in the wizard you can specify a specific user account, or even after you've used the wizard, you can use the properties of this to identify a user account. So for example, I'm trying to do a backup here, and I want to do it maybe every day, and then I'll go ahead and start time, start date, and so forth. I'm just going to kind of quickly go through that. Then here's where I would enter in the name of the account. So here we've got our Nugget Lab backup service user account, and then I'll enter in the same password that was entered in for that account. Now one thing again to be careful of here is that if this password ever does get changed, maybe you feel that it could have been compromised or something like that, if you've changed it in Active Directory, don't forget to go back into the scheduled task to also change it again. So when we click this task and go ahead and finish it, then if we need to change that password for this backup task that we've got going on here, you can either double-click on it or right-click on it and choose Properties like I just did. And then we can go back to this account right here where it says Backup, and then there's the name of the user account there. Then just click Set Password and enter and confirm the new password. And just important to remember to be able to do that so that you don't suddenly have stop or cessation of various scheduled tasks. In this nugget, we took a look at services, which, remember, are little processes that just kind of hover in the background waiting for something to do, but they don't do anything unless you first started them. If they're set at disabled, you have to set them to manual and then start them, or you can configure them to automatic so that they can automatically start up when the system starts up. Then once they've started, they can still have problems, however, because there are dependencies, remember. Oops, that was supposed to be a checkbox. Let me try that again. Because remember, there's certain services that depend upon other services, and if one of them is not running, it can cause a domino effect and cause a lot of problems, like the telephony service that we looked at there. Also, we took a look at user accounts. Remember, you have to have a user account that is not disabled, that is not locked out also, by the way, and that doesn't have an expiring password, because if that password expires and the service depends upon that user account, well, it can't use it now because the password's expired. And that also has relevance with user accounts and scheduled tasks, which are not really services, but which also use user accounts in such a way that you have to make sure that user account is constantly available. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.